My mother-in-law sat across from me and smiled as my husband slid the divorce papers across the mahogany table. "Sign it," he said, his voice completely hollow. She showed me everything. I looked down at the glossy photographs scattered next to my untouched champagne. They showed me walking into a hotel with another man. I looked at her, then slowly back at him. "Actually," I said, "let me show you what she did not want you to find. My name is Claire. I am 34 years old, and I never thought my marriage would end in a boardroom-style ambush at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. And if you have ever had a toxic mother-in-law try to ruin your life, hit subscribe. Trust me, you will want to hear how I dismantled her entire empire." The evening had started like any other tense family dinner. We were at an exclusive French restaurant in downtown Chicago, a place my mother-in-law, Catherine, frequented to assert her dominance. At 62, Catherine was the director of her family elite charity board. She was a woman who treated every family interaction like a hostile corporate takeover. She wore her signature pearls and a smirk that always made my skin crawl. She deliberately ordered the cheapest house salad for me, while ordering the butter-poached lobster for my husband. It was her petty way of reminding me of my place. Richard, my husband of 5 years, sat beside her. He was a 35-year-old plastic surgeon, the golden boy of the family, and entirely dependent on his mother for social validation. I had just taken a sip of my sparkling water when Richard cleared his throat. He did not look me in the eye. Instead, he reached into his designer blazer and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the table. The heavy thud silenced the soft classical music playing in the background. Divorce papers. Right on top of them were a dozen high-definition photographs. I stared at the images. There I was, or someone who looked exactly like me, wearing my favorite beige trench coat, entering the lobby of the Grand Marquis Hotel. Next to me was Daniel, a former corporate client of mine. The camera angle made it look like we were holding hands. In another photograph, we were standing too close by the elevators. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my brain did something else entirely. As an independent financial auditor, my entire career is built on finding discrepancies. I analyze complex data, uncover hidden financial truths, and spot lies buried in massive spreadsheets. I am trained to remove emotion from the equation and look strictly at the cold, hard facts. While any other wife might have burst into tears, begged for forgiveness, or screamed in denial, my eyes automatically scanned the photographs for data points. Catherine leaned forward, swirling her expensive red wine. "We know exactly what you have been doing behind his back." "Claire," she said, her voice dripping with absolute venom, "Richard is disgusted. You have broken the morality clause in the prenuptial agreement. You get nothing. Not the penthouse, not the clinic shares, absolutely nothing." She was practically vibrating with joy. Catherine had always hated me. I came from a working-class neighborhood, paid my own way through college, and refused to worship at the altar of her family trust fund. I built my auditing firm from the ground up. I even used my own hard-earned savings to help Richard open his private medical practice when his mother temporarily cut him off to teach him a lesson about obedience. But none of that mattered to her. I was just the commoner who had somehow infiltrated her perfect aristocratic lineage. Richard finally looked at me, his face twisted in fake betrayal. "How could you do this to me?" he asked loudly enough for the waiter walking by to hear. "I gave you a perfect life." I picked up the first photograph. The lighting was perfect, maybe a little too perfect. I looked at the date stamp in the bottom right corner. October 14th, 2 weeks ago. A Tuesday. My auditor brain quickly cataloged the details. I looked at the wrist of the woman in the photograph. She was wearing my distinctive rose gold watch. But there was a massive logical problem with that specific detail. A detail only I would know. I placed the photograph back down carefully, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the table. I did not cry. I did not yell. I just looked at the two people I called family and realized they had spent months planning my total financial and social destruction. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Richard shifted in his seat, suddenly finding his expensive leather loafers fascinating. Catherine, however, thrived in the silence. She leaned closer, tapping a manicured fingernail against the thick manila envelope. The prenuptial agreement was very clear, Claire, she said, her tone mimicking a teacher scolding a slow student. Section 4, paragraph 2, the morality clause. I insisted Richard include it, and thank heavens I did. It states that in the event of documented infidelity, the offending party forfeits all claims to marital assets, spousal support, and most importantly, any equity in joint business ventures. Richard finally looked up, his jaw set in a rigid line. You lose your shares in the clinic, Claire. My lawyers have already drawn up the paperwork. You walk away with exactly what you had when we got married. Nothing. I kept my expression entirely neutral, though my mind was racing at 100 miles an hour. When we got married, I had just started my auditing firm. I had a modest savings account. Over the past 5 years, I had poured every ounce of my financial expertise and a significant chunk of my own money into Richard and his medical practice. When his mother temporarily froze his trust fund to force him into attending her ridiculous socialite events instead of opening his clinic, I was the one who handed him the check for the down payment on his lease. I built his billing system, I did his taxes, I secured his business loans, and now they were using a fabricated scandal to strip me of my investment. I looked back down at the photograph. The woman in the picture had her face turned slightly away from the camera, but the profile was remarkably similar to mine. The hair color was an exact match. The beige trench coat was identical to the one currently hanging in our hallway closet. It was a brilliant forgery, likely a body double combined with some high-end digital manipulation. But as an auditor, I know that fraudsters always make one crucial mistake. They focus so much on the big picture that they forget the microscopic details. My eyes locked onto the left wrist of the woman in the photograph. She was wearing my signature rose gold watch. It was a distinct piece, a vintage model I wore every single day. The date stamp on the bottom of the photo clearly read October 14th. The problem was, the clasp on that watch had broken on October 1st. I had personally dropped it off at an antique jeweler downtown for repairs on October 2nd. It was still sitting in their safe waiting for a custom part from Switzerland. I knew this for an absolute fact because the claim ticket was sitting in the zippered compartment of my purse right next to my wallet. I could have pulled out the receipt right then and there. I could have slapped it onto the mahogany table, exposed their lie, and watched Catherine choke on her expensive wine. The urge to vindicate myself was a burning fire in my chest, but my professional instincts kicked in, throwing ice water over my anger. If I revealed the flaw now, I would only be teaching them how to be better liars. They would simply take the photos back, fix the digital rendering, or worse, fabricate financial documents that I could not easily disprove. If Catherine was willing to hire a body double or a digital editor to frame me, she was entirely capable of destroying my career and my life in a dozen other ways. I was up against a woman with infinite resources and zero moral boundaries. To beat them, I had to let them think they had already won. I needed them arrogant. I needed them sloppy. I took a deep breath, forcing my shoulders to slump slightly. I let my eyes widen, mimicking the exact look of a woman who had just been caught red-handed. I looked at Richard, letting a tiny tremor enter my voice. "Is this really how you want to do this, Richard?" I asked softly. "After everything we built together." Richard puffed out his chest, emboldened by my apparent defeat. "You destroyed what we built the second you walked into that hotel room with Daniel." He snapped, his voice dripping with rehearsed righteous indignation. "Do not play the victim here, Claire. You brought this on yourself." Catherine slid a gold-plated pen across the table. It stopped right next to the divorce papers. "Sign the acknowledgement of receipt," she commanded. "It just proves you have been served the documents and the evidence. You have 48 hours to pack your things and vacate the penthouse." I stared at the pen. Then I picked it up. My hand did not shake as I signed my name on the dotted line. I was not signing away my life. I was officially accepting their declaration of war. I slid the signed document back across the polished mahogany table. Catherine snatched it up instantly, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of a hunter who had just secured her prize. She carefully placed the paper inside a leather folder, patting it twice, as if officially sealing my fate. Richard let out a long breath and adjusted his designer collar. He looked incredibly relieved, mostly because I had not caused a loud public scene. In his elite social circles, appearances were everything, and he hated public scenes more than anything else in the world. "I think it is best if you do not go back to the clinic tomorrow," he said, his voice returning to its usual arrogant cadence. "I will have the head receptionist box up all your personal items from the billing office. You can pick them up from the loading dock on Friday afternoon. And Claire, let us keep this civilized. I do not want you crying to any of the hospital board members about this." I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. I picked up my purse and slung it over my shoulder. I looked at Richard, then at Catherine. They were already signaling the waiter for the check, completely dismissing me from their presence. "Civilized," I repeated, letting the word hang heavy in the air. "I can certainly be civilized. But before I go pack my entire life into a few cardboard boxes, I feel we should clarify one small detail about the events of October 14th. Catherine paused, her hand hovering over her crystal water glass. "What is there to clarify?" she snapped dismissively. "The photographic evidence is irrefutable. You are stalling." I reached into my purse and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen a few times, navigating to an encrypted cloud folder I used for backing up all my vehicle data. Since I frequently drove to various corporate offices and high-security buildings, for my audits, I had installed a premium front and rear dashcam system on my car for liability purposes. What neither of them knew was that the system continuously uploaded high-definition footage directly to my private server. I placed the phone right in the center of the table and turned the volume all the way up. "Actually, Catherine, the evidence is quite fascinating," I said calmly. On the screen, a crisp video began to play. It was perfectly time-stamped, October 14th, exactly 2 hours before the supposed photograph of me and Daniel had been taken. The footage showed the busy valet loop at the Grand Marquis Hotel. Suddenly, a sleek black Bentley pulled directly into the frame. Catherine stiffened, her eyes locked onto the glowing screen. The valet opened the back door of the Bentley, and out stepped Catherine herself, wearing a highly distinctive emerald green coat and an oversized designer sun hat. She handed the valet a $100 bill, looking around nervously before walking straight into the main lobby. The video kept playing, showing her talking to a younger woman standing near the revolving doors. A woman who looked suspiciously like the person in the photograph they had just handed me. A woman wearing my exact beige trench coat. I paused the video right on a clear shot of Catherine speaking to the decoy. "It is strange," I said, leaning over the table. "You explicitly told Richard you were at a charity board luncheon all day on the 14th. Yet here you are at the exact same hotel at the exact same time, speaking to a woman who just happens to own the same coat as me. Setting up a staged photo shoot, perhaps." The color completely drained from Catherine's face. Her mouth opened, but absolutely no words came out. The smug, aristocratic armor she wore so proudly shattered in a single instant. She looked frantically at Richard, her hands trembling violently as she reached for her glass of wine. Her fingers slipped, knocking the expensive crystal over. The dark red liquid spilled across the pristine white tablecloth, spreading rapidly like a pool of blood. Richard stared at this frozen image on my phone, his jaw tight. For a split second, I saw genuine confusion in his eyes. He saw the truth right in front of him. But then a lifetime of psychological conditioning kicked in. He was a man whose entire lifestyle, social standing, and medical practice depended entirely on her massive trust fund. He could not afford to see his mother as the villain. He snatched my phone from the table and shoved it aggressively back toward me. "Are you completely out of your mind?" He hissed, his face turning an ugly shade of red. Do you actually think this proves anything at all? My mother was at that hotel because we already suspected you were cheating on me. She took the initiative. She hired a private investigator and went to the property herself to catch you in the act. You are twisting the narrative to save yourself from the consequences of your own disgusting actions. He was lying, and we both knew it. But he had made his final choice. He was going down with her sinking ship. I am done being generous with you, Richard spat, slamming his hand hard on the table. The 48-hour grace period is officially over. I want you out of my penthouse tonight. If you are not gone by the time I get home, I am calling building security and having you thrown out on the street like the trash you are. I picked up my phone, sliding it smoothly back into my purse. I looked down at the spilled wine dripping onto the floor, then back up at the two of them. I will be gone, I said, my voice steady and completely cold. But remember this exact moment, Richard. Remember that you chose to protect her over the truth, because when my audit of this family is done, there will be nowhere left to hide. 2 hours later, I stood on the rain-slicked pavement outside the towering glass and steel condominium building I used to call home. The Chicago wind whipped around me, biting through the thin fabric of my beige trench coat. At my feet sat 2 large suitcases, hastily packed with whatever essentials I could grab, before building security, tipped off by Richard, escorted me to the service elevator. The regular doorman, a man I had bought coffee for every Friday for 3 years, looked away, pretending not to see me shivering in the downpour. Catherine influence was already working its poison. I pulled my collar up against the freezing rain and pulled out my phone to hail a cab. Just as I unlocked the screen, a massive black SUV pulled up to the curb, splashing water over my boots. The passenger window rolled down. Get in, Claire. I leaned forward, squinting through the heavy rain. Behind the steering wheel sat Jamal, my brother-in-law. Jamal was a 34-year-old cybersecurity expert, brilliant, observant, and the only person in Richard family who possessed a functioning moral compass. He was married to Nicole, Richard's younger sister. More importantly, Jamal was an African-American man from Detroit who had married into a family of old-money white aristocrats. We had an unspoken bond from day one, both of us forever viewed as outsiders who had somehow snuck through the back door of the country club. Jamal did not wait for me to answer. He threw the SUV into park, stepped out into the pouring rain without an umbrella, and tossed my heavy suitcases into the trunk like they weighed nothing at all. He slammed the trunk shut and jogged back to the driver's seat. I climbed into the passenger side, shivering as the warm air from the vents hit my soaked clothes. You did not have to come get me, I said, wiping rainwater from my forehead. If Catherine finds out you are helping me, she will make your life a living nightmare. Jamal let out a deep, booming laugh and pulled the SUV back into the heavy city traffic. Please, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Catherine already hates me. I am just the diversity quota she parades around at her charity galas, so her billionaire friends can feel progressive. Behind closed doors, she still asks me if I know any good landscaping companies, because she assumes I must have a cousin in the business. She has been trying to get Nicole to divorce me since our wedding day. I'm not scared of that woman. I leaned my head against the cold window, the adrenaline of the evening finally wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. How did you even know I was out here? I asked. Jamal tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. Nicole called me crying about 30 minutes ago. She said Catherine just hosted an emergency family Zoom call. According to your lovely mother-in-law, you were caught red-handed in a hotel room with a client, and Richard bravely threw you out to protect his honor. Nicole was hyperventilating, but I just hung up the phone and grabbed my car keys. You did not believe her? I asked softly. Jamal scoffed, shaking his head. Claire, you are an auditor who color-codes your grocery lists and refuses to jaywalk. The idea of you having a messy hotel affair is the most ridiculous fiction Catherine has ever written. Besides, I know how that family operates. They consume people. They looked at you and saw a smart, hard-working woman who could fund Richard's dream clinic. Now that the clinic is highly profitable, They do not need the blue-collar charity case hanging around, making them look less aristocratic. You are a threat because you built your own wealth. So they manufactured a reason to dispose of you and keep the money. It is textbook Catherine. Hearing him summarize the situation so perfectly made a tight knot in my chest suddenly loosen. I was not crazy. I was not alone. They faked the photos, Jamal, I said, my voice hardening. They hired a double and photoshopped the details. They are trying to trigger the morality clause in the prenup so I lose my clinic shares. Jamal tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his jaw clenching. I figured it was something like that. These people think because they have money, they can just rewrite reality to suit their needs. They think people like us, people who actually had to work for our degrees and our bank accounts, are just pawns on their chessboard. He took a sharp left turn, heading away from the downtown core and toward the quieter, tree-lined streets of his neighborhood. Well, he continued, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. They picked a fight with the wrong pawns. You are a financial auditor, and I am a cybersecurity architect. They want to play dirty digital games. Let them try. I have a guest room with your name on it, Claire. And more importantly, I have something you are going to want to see. Something I found while doing a routine security update on the family network last week. I turned to look at him, my heart rate picking up again, not from fear this time, but from anticipation. What did you find? I asked. Jamal pulled into his driveway, putting the SUV in park, before turning to look at me dead in the eye. Let us just say, Catherine is not as good at hiding her digital footprints as she thinks she is, he replied. Get your bags. We have work to do. The rain was coming down in sheets as Jamal and I hurried up the brick walkway to his house. Before we even reached the porch, the front door swung open. Nicole stood there, wrapped in a thick cardigan, her face pale, and her eyes red from crying. She did not hesitate for a single second. She rushed forward, pulling me into a tight hug, right there in the freezing rain. I am so sorry, Claire, she whispered fiercely into my shoulder. I am so unbelievably sorry for what they are doing to you. Walking into their home felt like stepping into a different universe. It was warm, chaotic, and filled with the smell of cinnamon and roasting coffee. There were framed photos on the walls showing genuine smiles, a stark contrast to the sterile museum-like perfection of the penthouse I had just been thrown out of. Nicole handed me a dry towel and a steaming mug of tea. She looked at me with a determination I had rarely seen in her when Catherine was around. We are with you, Claire, she said firmly. Richard made his bed with that monster, but we are not going to let them destroy you. Jamal did not waste any time with pleasantries. He grabbed my arm and led me straight down the hallway to his home office. It was a massive room that looked more like a government control center than a typical study. 3 giant curved monitors dominated the heavy oak desk, glowing with lines of green and blue code. He gestured for me to sit in the leather chair beside him while he dropped into his own. Last Thursday, Catherine summoned me to the family estate. Jamal began, his fingers already flying across the mechanical keyboard. She was complaining that her private laptop was running too slowly and demanded I fix it immediately. Standard rich person IT support. I told her I needed to run a full diagnostic and backup before wiping the hard drive to speed it up. It is basic protocol to create a mirror image of the entire system, just in case the client suddenly remembers a crucial file they forgot to save. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a sleek silver flash drive, holding it up between his index finger and thumb. While the cloning process was running, I noticed something strange, he continued. There was a hidden partitioned drive buried deep within her system files. It was heavily encrypted. Now Catherine barely knows how to attach a document to an email. There is absolutely no way she set up military-grade encryption by herself. She hired a professional to hide whatever was in that partition. And as a cybersecurity guy telling me I cannot look at a hidden file on my own family network is basically a direct challenge. Jamal plugged the silver flash drive into a port on his tower. I ran a customized brute force password cracker on it all weekend. Honestly, I thought it might just be offshore tax evasion documents or embarrassing emails. It finally broke the encryption about an hour before Nicole called me tonight. I have not even looked at the contents yet. I wanted to wait for you. He tapped the enter key one final time. The massive center monitor went black for a split second before a single file directory appeared on the screen. It contained one main folder. The title read, Trust Disbursements. I leaned forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. As an auditor, numbers are my second language. I had actually offered to audit the family charity trust for free 2 years ago, but Catherine had aggressively shut the idea down, claiming they had a private firm handle it. I knew the public tax filings of her charity by heart, because I had reviewed them out of professional curiosity. The official ledgers always showed small, respectable donations to local hospitals and community art programs. Open the most recent spreadsheet, I told Jamal, my voice dropping to a low whisper. He double-clicked the file at the top of the list. A massive spreadsheet expanded across the screen, filled with thousands of rows of financial data. My eyes immediately locked onto the columns. These were not donations to hospitals. These were monthly wire transfers. $50,000 here, $100,000 there. All funneled into a series of obscure corporate entities registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. Jamal let out a heavy breath. Claire, he said quietly, looking at the total sum at the bottom of the page. This is not just a few hidden assets. I stared at the screen, the reality of what we had just uncovered washing over me. The fake cheating scandal. The sudden urgency to push me out of the family with zero assets. It all made terrifying sense now. Catherine was not just a snob trying to protect her bloodline. She was actively embezzling millions of dollars from her own family charity. And she framed me to ensure I would never get close enough to her finances to find out. The game had just changed forever. I barely slept that night. When sunlight finally filtered through the blinds of the guest bedroom, it brought no comfort. My phone began vibrating aggressively against the wooden nightstand, rattling like a warning bell. I rolled over, my muscles aching from the tension of the previous evening, and picked up the device. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of notifications. 17 missed calls, 32 text messages, and an inbox overflowing with urgent emails marked with high-priority flags. I sat up, my heart rate instantly spiking. The messages were not from concerned family members offering sympathy. They were from my professional network. Clients, board members, corporate partners. I opened the first email at the top of the list. It was from the chief financial officer of a mid-sized tech firm, one of my most lucrative and loyal accounts. I had been their lead auditor for 3 years. The subject line read, Immediate termination of contract. My eyes scanned the paragraphs. The wording was cold, legal, and completely devastating. They stated that due to recent credible allegations regarding severe breaches of professional ethics and moral turpitude, they were severing all ties with my auditing firm, effective immediately. The email vaguely referenced a conflict of interest involving inappropriate relations with a former client. Daniel. Catherine had not just fabricated a story about a lonely housewife having a fling at a hotel. She had deliberately framed the narrative to make it look like I was sleeping with my corporate clients to manipulate financial data or secure contracts. She knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. My entire career was built on integrity, trust, and an unblemished reputation. By attacking my ethics, she was effectively burning my business to the ground. I clicked over to my voicemail. The first message was from another major client, a regional logistics company. The CEO sounded deeply uncomfortable but resolute. He said he had received a disturbing phone call from a prominent member of the downtown country club, someone he relied on for investment networking. That someone was obviously Catherine. She had personally called my clients under the guise of warning them about my supposed lack of moral character. He apologized, but said his board of directors could not risk the bad public relations of keeping me on retainer. 2 major contracts accounting for nearly 40% of my annual revenue were gone before 8 in the morning. I scrolled through my text messages next. They were from women I thought were my friends' fellow wives from the charity committees I had been forced to join over the years. Their messages were perfectly disguised as concern, but I could read the vicious curiosity beneath the polite words. They were asking if the rumors were true, mentioning how shocked Richard must be, and saying they were praying for my soul. Catherine had poisoned the entire well. I was officially a social pariah in the city elite circles. I dropped the phone onto the bed and buried my face in my hands. The sheer speed and ruthlessness of the attack took my breath away. She was not just trying to force me out of the family with an empty bank account. She wanted me entirely destitute, unemployable, and thoroughly humiliated. She was deploying decades of accumulated social capital and old money influence to crush a woman who had the audacity to be self-made. She wanted to make sure I had absolutely no resources left to fight back or hire a decent lawyer to contest the prenuptial agreement. For a brief, terrifying moment, the panic threatened to swallow me whole. The walls of the guest room felt like they were closing in. I had worked 80-hour weeks for years to build my firm. I had sacrificed vacations and my own peace of mind to establish myself as a top-tier auditor in a male-dominated industry. And this wealthy, vindictive woman was dismantling my life work before breakfast, just to cover up her own federal crimes. A soft knock on the door broke through my spiraling thoughts. Nicole peeked her head in, holding a steaming mug of coffee. She took one look at my pale face and the glowing phone on the bed, and her expression softened with deep empathy. "She is making her move," Nicole said quietly, walking over and placing the coffee on the nightstand. "Jamal is already in his office. He said to tell you the financial data from the charity is fully decrypted and waiting for your review." I took a deep breath, letting the aroma of the dark roast ground me back to reality. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, sharp anger that felt entirely different from anything I had ever experienced. Catherine thought she was destroying a helpless victim. She thought stripping away my professional contracts would leave me paralyzed with fear. She made a massive miscalculation. Taking away my daily work obligations just meant I now had unlimited free time to dedicate entirely to her destruction. I threw off the blankets and reached for the coffee mug. "Tell Jamal I will be there in 5 minutes," I said, my voice completely steady. "I lost 2 clients today, but by the time I am done auditing her secret ledgers, Catherine is going to lose her freedom." I walked down the hall and stepped into Jamal's home office. The glow of his 3 massive monitors illuminated the room in a cool blue light. He was already typing furiously, multiple spreadsheets open across the screens. Nicole sat on the small leather sofa in the corner, her arms crossed tight across her chest. I pulled up a chair next to Jamal and set my coffee mug on the desk. "Let us see what my mother-in-law has been hiding," I said. Jamal hit a key and maximized the main ledger file. "I spent the last hour running a basic sorting algorithm on these wire transfers," he explained. "Catherine has been making regular disbursements from the family charity trust account for the past 4 years. The official tax returns she files with the government claim these funds go to various local community programs and educational initiatives. But the internal routing numbers paint a completely different picture." I leaned in closer, my eyes scanning the columns of data. As a financial auditor, I have spent my entire career tracking where money comes from and exactly where it goes. People can lie, but numbers never do. I pointed to a recurring transaction listed on the screen. "Look at this one," I said. A wire transfer of $85,000 made on the 1st of every month to an entity called Horizon Consulting Group. Publicly, this was likely categorized as an administrative expense. But let us look at the routing number. Jamal quickly copied the routing number and ran it through a financial database he had access to. A few seconds later, the results popped up. "Horizon Consulting Group is not a real consulting firm," he said, his voice dropping low. "It is an LLC registered in Delaware. The registered agent is a corporate compliance factory that specializes in hiding the true owners of shell companies." My mind raced. "Look at the other large transfers I instructed." Jamal scrolled down the list. There were dozens of them. Apex Educational Services received $120,000. Summit Community Outreach received 90,000. Every single one of these so-called charities or consulting firms was just a front. They were all shell companies registered in states with strict corporate secrecy laws. Pull up the total aggregate amount transferred to these shell companies over the last 48 months. I said, my heart pounding against my ribs. Jamal highlighted the columns and ran the calculation. The number that flashed at the bottom of the screen made Nicole gasp from the sofa. $4.2 million. Catherine had siphoned over $4 million from a tax-exempt foundation. This was no longer just a bitter mother-in-law trying to protect her aristocratic family. This was a massive, highly coordinated financial crime. This is wire fraud, I said, staring at the staggering number. It is embezzlement on a federal scale. If the FBI gets a hold of this ledger, Catherine is looking at 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Nicole stood up and walked over behind us, staring at the screen in pure disbelief. I cannot believe it, she whispered. The charity was my grandfather's legacy. She is using it as her personal piggy bank. But why? The family trust already gives her an enormous allowance. Why risk federal prison to steal from her own charity? That is exactly what we need to figure out, I replied. Embezzlers do not just hoard cash in shell companies for no reason. They need that money to fund something they cannot pay for openly. We need to find out where the money goes after it hits those Delaware accounts. Jamal cracked his knuckles, a determined look settling on his face. Tracing money through Delaware shell companies is difficult, he said. But it is not impossible if you know how to look for digital leaks. Whoever set up these accounts for her had to leave a trail. An email address, an IP login, a secondary bank transfer. Give me a few hours to dig into the routing history of Horizon Consulting Group. I will find out whose pocket this money is actually ending up in. I nodded, feeling a cold sense of purpose settle over me. Catherine had tried to destroy my career this morning by accusing me of unethical behavior. Meanwhile, she was running a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme right under everyone's noses. My cell phone suddenly buzzed on the desk, shattering the intense silence in the room. I looked down at the screen. It was a text message from Richard. He was demanding I come back to the penthouse to collect the rest of my belongings immediately under the watchful eye of his corporate lawyer. The real war was only just beginning. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. The text from Richard was completely devoid of any warmth. It simply read, "Be at the building lobby at 2:00 sharp. My attorney will escort you upstairs to pack the rest of your clothes. Do not be late." I showed the message to Jamal and Nicole. Jamal immediately pushed his chair back from his desk and stood up. "I am coming with you," he said firmly. "There is no way I am letting you walk into an ambush with Richard and his legal attack dogs alone." I shook my head, slipping my phone into my pocket. "No," I replied. "If you come with me, Catherine will know we are working together. Right now, she thinks I am completely isolated, terrified, and desperate. We need her to keep believing that. I will handle Richard and his lawyer. You stay here and keep tracking those Delaware shell companies. Find out exactly who is receiving that $4 million. Jamal hesitated, but eventually nodded, sitting back down at his glowing monitors. "Be careful, Claire," he warned. "They are trying to back you into a corner and break your spirit." An hour later, I stepped out of a taxi and walked through the heavy glass doors of the luxury high-rise building I used to call home. The lobby was a massive expanse of imported marble crystal chandeliers and velvet seating areas designed to intimidate outsiders. Usually, it was a quiet, dignified space, but today, the atmosphere was incredibly thick with tension. Richard was standing near the front desk wearing a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. Standing right next to him was a tall, sharp-featured man carrying a thick leather briefcase. I instantly recognized him as Gregory Preston, the aggressive corporate attorney Catherine kept on a massive retainer for the family business. As I walked toward them, I noticed several of my former neighbors lingering in the lobby. Mrs. Gable, a wealthy socialite from the penthouse across from ours, suddenly stopped checking her mail. Mr. and Mrs. Kensington pretended to be deeply engrossed in a conversation near the elevators, but their eyes tracked my every move. Catherine had done her work perfectly. The entire building had been infected with the fake cheating rumors. Richard did not even say hello. He just crossed his arms and looked at me with an expression of profound disgust. "You are exactly on time," Gregory Preston said, stepping forward and blocking my path to the elevators. "I am Mr. Preston, representing your husband. Before we allow you access to the premises, we have a few ground rules to establish." His voice was intentionally loud, echoing off the marble walls. He wanted the neighbors to hear every single word. It was a calculated performance designed to publicly humiliate me, to strip away my dignity before I even stepped foot in the elevator. "You will be given exactly 45 minutes to collect your remaining clothing and personal toiletries." Gregory continued, pulling a clipboard from his briefcase. "You are strictly forbidden from taking any financial documents, electronics belonging to the estate, or items of significant value, including jewelry gifted to you during the marriage. Building security will be standing by the door the entire time. If you attempt to cause a scene or take anything that does not belong to you, we will have you arrested for trespassing and theft." I could hear Mrs. Gable gasp quietly behind me. The whispers grew louder. Richard looked incredibly smug, clearly enjoying the power dynamic. He thought I would break down crying or run out of the lobby in shame. Instead, I stood perfectly still. I looked at Gregory Preston, then at Richard, and finally around the lobby at the gossiping neighbors. My training as an auditor had taught me how to handle hostile environments. When corporate executives tried to intimidate me during an audit, I never matched their anger. I used silence and absolute precision to disarm them. I reached out and took the clipboard from Gregory's hand. I did not look at the document. I looked directly into his eyes. "Mr. Preston," I said, my voice completely level and calm, carrying perfectly across the silent lobby. "I am fully aware of my legal rights. As my name is still on the lease of that penthouse, and no formal eviction notice or court order has been signed by a judge, you currently have absolutely no legal authority to restrict my access to my own home or my personal belongings." Gregory opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off smoothly. Furthermore, I continued, taking a step closer to him. "If you attempt to illegally detain me or restrict my movement, I will immediately call the police and file charges for unlawful harassment. Now you can either step aside and let me pack my socks in peace, or we can make this a matter of public record. It is entirely your choice." Gregory Preston closed his mouth. His aggressive posture faltered for a fraction of a second. He glanced at Richard, clearly not expecting the disgraced penniless wife to quote tenancy laws back at him. I did not wait for his permission. I shoved the clipboard back against his chest, stepped around him, and pressed the button for the elevator. The silver doors slid open with a soft chime. I walked inside, turned around, and looked out at Richard. His smug expression had vanished, replaced by a look of nervous confusion. "Are you coming to supervise me, Richard?" I asked coldly. "Or do you need your mother to hold your hand in the elevator?" The doors slowly closed, cutting off his angry response and leaving the whispering lobby behind. The doors slowly closed, cutting off his angry response and leaving the whispering lobby behind. The ride up to the 42nd floor was entirely silent. When the elevator opened directly into the penthouse, the sheer scale of the space struck me. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, casting long afternoon shadows across the imported hardwood floors. I walked straight down the hallway to my home office. This was the room where I spent countless late nights reviewing ledgers and running my auditing firm. I pulled cardboard boxes from the closet and began emptying my desk drawers. I packed my framed degrees, my specialized financial software drives, and my favorite reference books. I had only been packing for about 10 minutes when I heard the heavy click of the front door unlocking. Gregory Preston appeared in the doorway of my office, out of breath, but looking just as smug as he had in the lobby. He had clearly taken the service elevator up to ensure he did not miss his window of opportunity to intimidate me in private. "I told you I do not need supervision, Mr. Preston," I said, not looking up from the box I was taping shut. Gregory stepped into the room, closing the heavy oak door behind him. He set his leather briefcase on my glass conference table. "I am not here to count your sweaters, Claire," he said, dropping his theatrical public voice. "I am here to offer you a graceful exit." He pulled a thick stack of stapled papers from the briefcase and slid them across the glass. "This is a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement," he explained. "My client is willing to be generous. If you sign this today, Richard will allow you to keep the vehicle currently registered in the clinic name. He will also waive his right to sue you for reputational damage caused by your infidelity." I paused, a roll of packing tape in my hand. I walked over to the table and picked up the document. I flipped through the pages rapidly. This was not a standard divorce gag order. It was an ironclad corporate NDA, specifically prohibiting me from discussing, investigating, or disclosing any financial information related to the family trust, Catherine Charity Board, and Richard Medical Practice. They were terrified. Catherine knew I was the only person with the financial literacy to connect the dots of her embezzlement scheme. She was using Richard fake divorce drama as a smokescreen to legally bind my silence. "You want me to sign away my right to report financial irregularities?" I asked, dropping the document back onto the table. "And you are offering me a used car in exchange for my permanent silence?" Gregory narrowed his eyes. "You are in no position to negotiate, Claire. Your reputation is ruined. Your business contracts are evaporating as we speak. If you refuse to sign this, Catherine will ensure you never work in corporate finance again. She will drag this divorce out until you are entirely bankrupt from legal fees. Sign the document, take the car, start over somewhere else." He was a highly paid mercenary, accustomed to bullying terrified spouses into submission. He expected me to crumble under the weight of Catherine's immense wealth. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my favorite pen. I clicked it open, hovering the ink over the signature line on the final page of the document. Gregory smiled, a look of profound satisfaction washing over his face. He thought he had won. I looked down at the paper, then back up at him. "Tell Catherine she made a fatal error," I said quietly. "If she had just let me walk away quietly, I might have never looked twice at her charity ledgers. But she decided to burn my career to the ground. Now I have nothing to lose and all the time in the world to look at the numbers." I put the cap back on my pen and slipped it into my pocket. "I will not sign your NDA, Mr. Preston. You can tell your client to save her legal fees. She is going to need every single penny for her criminal defense attorney." Gregory's face went completely rigid. He snatched the document off the table, his knuckles turning white. "You are making a massive mistake," he hissed. "Get out of my office," I replied, pointing toward the door. "You have 30 seconds before I call building security." He glared at me, his chest heaving with rage, before turning and storming out of the room. I listened to his heavy footsteps march down the hall, followed by the loud slam of the front door. I was entirely alone in the penthouse again. I let out a long breath, my hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. I had just declared open warfare on a billionaire. I needed to finish packing and get out of there. I taped up my final box of files and carried it out to the living room, setting it down next to my suitcases by the front door. I stood by the front door, looking out over the massive living room of the penthouse one last time. The late afternoon sun was casting long golden rays across the imported Italian marble floors. The silence was absolute. In just 48 hours, my entire life had been uprooted, systematically dismantled by a family that treated people like disposable assets. I checked my pockets to make sure I had my phone and my keys. My hand brushed against the fabric of my coat pocket, and I realized something was missing. I had lost my favorite silver pen. It was a heavy, custom-engraved piece I used to sign every single audit report for my firm. I had used it earlier to refuse Gregory Preston and his ridiculous non-disclosure agreement, but in the adrenaline rush of kicking him out of my office, I must have misplaced it. I retraced my steps mentally. Before the lawyer arrived, I had been sitting on the large custom leather sofa in the center of the living room, sorting through a final stack of client folders. I left my boxes by the door and walked back to the center of the room. I checked the glass coffee table, but the surface was completely bare. I sighed, kneeling down next to the sofa. I ran my hand along the deep crevices between the heavy leather cushions, hoping to feel the familiar cold metal of the pen. The sofa was ridiculously oversized, something Richard had insisted on buying to impress his colleagues. My fingers slipped deep into the gap between the middle and corner cushions. I felt something hard. I grasped it and pulled it out. It was not my silver pen. I stared down at the object in my hand. It was a cheap black plastic prepaid smartphone, the kind of burner phone you could buy for $30 at any corner convenience store. I turned it over in my palm, my brow furrowing in confusion. Richard was a man entirely obsessed with status. He refused to wear a watch that cost less than a luxury car and upgraded his high-end smartphone every single time a new model was released. The absolute last thing he would ever own was a disposable plastic phone, and Catherine certainly would never allow such a cheap piece of technology into her pristine environment. My auditor instincts immediately flared to life. When you find something cheap hidden in a place of extreme luxury, it almost always points to a secret someone is desperate to keep. My mind raced back to the Delaware shell companies and the missing $4 million. Was this how Catherine communicated with her offshore accounts? Was this phone the missing link Jamal and I needed to connect the embezzled charity funds to their final destination? I pressed my thumb against the power button on the side of the device. For an agonizing few seconds, nothing happened. I held my breath, wondering if the battery was completely dead. Then the cheap plastic casing vibrated slightly against my palm. A generic bright white logo flashed across the scratched screen as the phone began its boot sequence. I slowly sat down on the edge of the leather sofa, my eyes locked on the small glowing screen. The loading bar seemed to inch across the display at an agonizingly slow pace. I mentally prepared myself to see banking apps, encrypted messaging platforms, or perhaps offshore account numbers. I was ready to memorize whatever data appeared before the battery died or the phone demanded a passcode. The screen went black for a fraction of a second, and then the lock screen illuminated. I did not need a passcode to see the wallpaper image. The bright, high-definition photograph filled the entire display, and the air was instantly knocked out of my lungs. It was not a spreadsheet. It was not a bank account. It was a picture of my husband. Richard was standing on the balcony of what looked like a tropical resort, wearing a loose linen shirt and a relaxed, genuine smile I had not seen directed at me in years. But he was not alone. His arms were wrapped tightly around the waist of a younger woman. She was leaning back against his chest, laughing radiantly at the camera. I knew her face instantly. It was Vanessa, Catherine's ambitious, overly attentive personal assistant. The 28-year-old woman who always seemed to linger just a little too long at our family dinners, pouring Richard wine and laughing entirely too hard at his terrible jokes. But that was not the detail that made the room spin around me. Vanessa was wearing a tight-fitting summer dress, and Richard's hands were resting protectively over her very prominent, very pregnant belly. She looked to be at least 6 or 7 months along. I stared at the glowing screen, my hands trembling so violently, I almost dropped the cheap plastic phone. The puzzle pieces violently slammed into place, creating a picture more twisted than I could have ever imagined. The fake cheating scandal. The sudden, desperate push to trigger the morality clause in the prenuptial agreement. The aggressive lawyer trying to buy my permanent silence with a used car. It was never just about Catherine hating me or wanting to keep my clinic shares. Richard had gotten his mother assistant pregnant. In the state of Illinois, if I divorced him for infidelity, the prenuptial agreement would be entirely invalidated, and I would be entitled to half of his massive estate and the medical practice. They could not afford a standard divorce. They needed me to be the villain. They needed me to be the one caught cheating, so I would be thrown out with absolutely nothing, leaving Richard free to start his new family with Vanessa without losing a single dime. The phone screen dimmed and went black, leaving me sitting in the silence of the penthouse. I slowly slipped the burner phone into my coat pocket. The sadness was entirely gone, burned away by a cold, blinding fury. They thought they had buried me. But they had just handed me the shovel. I zipped my coat, grabbed the heavy handles of my suitcases, and walked out of the penthouse without looking back. The elevator ride down felt entirely different this time. I was no longer the discarded, humiliated wife retreating from a battlefield. I was an auditor who had just found the master ledger. By the time I reached the lobby, Mrs. Gable and the Kensingtons were still lingering, their eyes burning with curiosity. I gave them a sharp, icy smile that made them instantly look away, then pushed through the heavy glass doors and hailed a cab back to Jamal House. The ride through the city was a blur. My mind was rapidly cross-referencing this new physical evidence with the financial data we had already uncovered. The twisted pieces of Catherine Grand's strategy were finally snapping into a coherent, horrifying picture. When I walked back into Jamal's home office, the atmosphere was thick with exhaustion. Nicole was asleep on the leather sofa, a throw blanket pulled over her shoulders. Jamal was rubbing his tired eyes, staring at a massive diagram of offshore bank accounts he had mapped out on his center monitor. I did not say a word. I simply walked up to his desk, reached into my coat pocket, and dropped the cheap plastic burner phone onto his keyboard. Jamal jumped slightly, blinking at the device. "What is this?" he asked, picking it up with 2 fingers like it was a piece of toxic waste. "I found it shoved deep between the cushions of the living room sofa," I replied, my voice hard and steady. "Turn it on." He pressed the power button. The screen lit up. I watched his face closely as the lock screen image of Richard and a heavily pregnant Vanessa appeared. Jamal's eyes widened in absolute shock. He let out a low whistle, completely speechless. The noise woke Nicole. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "What did you find?" she mumbled, walking over to the desk. She looked at the screen over Jamal's shoulder. Her breath hitched. She covered her mouth with both hands, stumbling back a step. "Is that Vanessa?" Nicole whispered, her voice trembling. "Catherine, assistant. And my brother." "Oh my God, Claire. She is pregnant." I nodded, pulling up a chair next to them. 6 or 7 months pregnant by the look of it. Which means this has been going on for a very long time, right under my nose. But this is not just a classic story of a cheating husband and his mother ambitious assistant. This is about money. It is always about the money. Jamal set the phone down carefully. "Explain it to me, Claire." "When Richard and I got married," I said, leaning forward, "Catherine insisted we sign an incredibly aggressive prenuptial agreement. She wanted to protect the family trust. I agreed because I did not care about her money. I was building my own firm. But there was a specific infidelity clause included. If either party was caught committing adultery, the offending party would forfeit all claims to any joint marital assets, including business equity." Jamal frowned, staring at the phone. "So if you caught Richard cheating, he would lose half of everything." "Exactly," I said. "He would lose half the penthouse. He would lose his luxury cars. But most importantly, he would lose half of the medical clinic. The clinic I funded with my own savings. The clinic that is currently generating millions of dollars a year. Under the terms of the prenup, if his infidelity caused the divorce, I would legally own 50% of his entire medical practice." Nicole sank back onto the sofa, the realization washing over her face. "They could not afford to let you find out about Vanessa," she said quietly. "If you filed for divorce first, Richard would be financially ruined. Catherine would never allow her golden boy to lose half his empire to a working-class outsider," I added. She needed a preemptive strike. She needed to trigger the morality clause against me before Vanessa baby bump became too obvious to hide. By framing me with those fake photographs and destroying my professional reputation, she guaranteed I would be thrown out of the family completely penniless. Richard gets to keep his wealth, he gets to keep the clinic I built, and he gets to start a brand new family with a woman Catherine can easily control. Jamal shook his head in disgust. "It is a perfectly executed financial assassination. She ruins your business so you cannot afford a lawyer to fight the fake evidence. She isolates you socially so no one believes your side of the story. And she secures her son's future without losing a single dime." And the non-disclosure agreement her lawyer tried to force me to sign today, I continued, was the final lock on the cage. They wanted to make sure I could never dig into their lives or expose the truth. They thought I was terrified. They thought I was beaten. Jamal picked up a data cable from his desk and plugged the burner phone directly into his computer tower. "We need to mirror everything on this device immediately," he said, his fingers already flying across the keyboard. "If Richard realizes he lost his secret phone, he might try to wipe it remotely. We need all the timestamps, the text messages, the location data. This is our golden ticket." I watched the progress bar appear on his monitor. Every text message Vanessa and Richard had exchanged was currently downloading into our secure server. The evidence they had tried to bury was now our most powerful weapon. We just needed to deploy it at the perfect moment. But to make this weapon truly devastating, I had to ensure Catherine never saw it coming. If she even suspected I had found Richard's secret phone, she would immediately deploy Gregory Preston and a small army of corporate litigators. They would file emergency injunctions, claim the phone was stolen property, and tie the evidence up in court for years. I could not fight her billions in a prolonged legal battle. I had to end this with a single lethal strike. And to do that, I needed her to believe she had already won completely. I looked at Jamal, who was staring at the screen as the download reached 50%. "We cannot let them know we have this," I said. "We need to lull them into a false sense of absolute security. They want to see me broken. They want me begging. So that is exactly what I am going to give them." Nicole looked concerned. "Claire, what are you planning to do?" I pulled my own cell phone out of my pocket. "I am going to surrender," I replied smoothly. I walked out of the home office and into the quiet hallway. I needed to focus entirely on my performance. As an auditor, I was used to masking my emotions, keeping a perfectly neutral face, while executives lied to me about their balance sheets. Now I had to do the exact opposite. I had to manufacture despair. I closed my eyes and thought about the sheer injustice of the last 48 hours. I thought about the loss of my clients, the betrayal of the man I had supported for 5 years, and the absolute viciousness of Catherine's scheme. I let the genuine anger rise in my chest, but I forced it upward, transforming the fury into a trembling breath and a highly convincing sob. I opened my eyes, letting them fill with tears, and dialed Catherine's personal number. The phone rang 4 times. I knew she was looking at the caller identification, savoring the moment, debating whether to even answer. On the 5th ring, the line clicked open. "Hello," Catherine said. Her voice was pure ice, devoid of any human empathy. "Catherine, please do not hang up," I said, allowing my voice to crack perfectly on the last syllable. I pressed my hand against the wall, taking a ragged, shallow breath to make it sound like I had been crying for hours. "I have nothing to say to you, Claire," she replied haughtily. "My attorney made you an incredibly generous offer this afternoon. You threw it back in his face. Your arrogance is matched only by your stupidity. You will hear from Richard's legal team on Monday morning, and they will not be nearly as polite." "Please," I sobbed, forcing a desperate plea into the receiver. "I am so sorry. I was just so angry and confused today. But I see it now. I see that I cannot fight you. You have ruined my business. My clients are gone. I have barely any money left in my personal checking account to even hire a lawyer. You have taken absolutely everything from me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the smug satisfaction radiating through the cellular tower. This was exactly what she wanted. Total submission. "You brought this entirely on yourself," Catherine said, though her tone was noticeably lighter, laced with triumphant superiority. "You forgot your place. You thought you could operate on our level." I know, I whimpered, wiping a completely dry cheek. "I just want this to be over. I cannot take the public humiliation anymore. The rumors are destroying whatever professional dignity I had left. If I sign the non-disclosure agreement, is the offer for a cash settlement still on the table? I do not want the car. I just need enough cash to secure an apartment and start over somewhere else. Please, Catherine, just let me walk away quietly." The silence stretched for a long, agonizing moment. I knew she was calculating the risk. Paying me off cleanly was the safest way to protect Richard's assets and Vanessa's secret. She could not resist the opportunity to watch me grovel in person. I suppose I can be reasonable. Catherine finally sighed, playing the role of the merciful victor. But I will not have you crying in my son's penthouse again. Meet me tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. There is a small coffee shop called the Daily Grind on 4th Street. It is sufficiently out of the way so none of my acquaintances will see me speaking with you. Bring your own pen this time. I will be there, I cried softly. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you. She disconnected the call without another word, leaving only the dial tone echoing in my ear. I pulled the phone away from my face. The trembling in my chest instantly vanished. The fake tears dried in the cool air of the hallway. I stood up completely straight, my face returning to an icy, emotionless mask. I walked back into the home office where Jamal and Nicole were waiting anxiously. Jamal looked at my expression. You got her. I nodded, sliding my phone back into my pocket. Tomorrow morning at 10. She thinks she is coming to buy my silence for pennies. I looked at the computer screen. The download bar had reached 100%. The folder containing every dirty secret of the Montgomery family was fully copied, heavily encrypted, and securely backed up onto multiple independent servers. Make sure you pack a hidden microphone for me tomorrow, Jamal, I said, looking down at the glowing digital files. Because when Catherine tries to extort me on tape, our trap will finally be complete. I arrived at the Daily Grind at 9:45 the next morning. It was a modest, independent coffee shop with exposed brick walls, mismatched wooden chairs, and the strong scent of roasted espresso beans. I chose a small table in the far corner facing the entrance and sat with my hands wrapped around a paper cup. Hidden beneath the collar of my thick wool sweater was a microscopic lapel microphone Jamal had wired for me just an hour earlier. It was currently transmitting crystal-clear audio directly to his secure server. At exactly 10 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed. Catherine walked in wearing a tailored charcoal suit, leather gloves, and oversized designer sunglasses. She stood near the entrance for a moment, looking around the bustling cafe with an expression of profound disgust. She looked as though the mere act of breathing the air in a middle-class establishment might give her a terminal disease. She spotted me in the corner and marched over her high heels, clicking sharply against the scuffed hardwood floor. She did not bother to buy a coffee or acknowledge the barista. She simply pulled out the wooden chair across from me and sat down, keeping her sunglasses firmly on her face. You look absolutely terrible, Claire Catherine said. Her voice was laced with a cruel, deep satisfaction. I had intentionally skipped makeup this morning, letting the dark circles under my eyes show. I had also styled my hair to look slightly unkempt, adding perfectly to the illusion of a defeated, broken woman. I looked down at my hands, forcing my shoulders to slump. I have not been sleeping, I replied, making sure my voice trembled just enough to sound pathetic. Catherine scoffed, opening her expensive leather handbag. She pulled out the exact same thick stack of papers Gregory Preston had tried to force on me the day before in the penthouse. She placed the non-disclosure agreement on the small table. Then she pulled out a crisp piece of paper and slid it directly across the wood toward me. It was a certified cashier check. I looked down at the printed amount. $50,000. It was an absolute insult. The medical clinic I had funded and built from the ground up was worth at least $6 million. My share alone was worth $3 million. She was offering me a fraction of a penny on the dollar to completely disappear from their lives. 50,000, I whispered, looking up at her and letting a single tear slip down my cheek. Catherine, that will barely cover a few months of rent and basic living expenses while I try to rebuild my auditing business. You know I lost my 2 biggest clients yesterday because of those awful rumors you spread about me. That is the price of crossing my family. Catherine sneered, leaning closer to the table so she could lower her voice. You should consider yourself incredibly lucky that I am giving you anything at all. You are a working-class nobody who tried to latch on to my son. I am giving you a generous severance package. I sniffled, wiping my nose with the sleeve of my sweater. But it is not fair. Richard is the one who wanted the divorce. Fairness is a concept for poor people, Claire, she replied coldly. Here are your options. If you do not sign this non-disclosure agreement right now, I will personally ensure that every corporate board in this city receives an anonymous dossier detailing your supposed ethical violations with your clients. You will never work as an auditor again in this state. I will bury you in so much legal debt you will be bankrupt by Christmas. So take the money, sign the paper. Keep your mouth shut and leave Richard alone. The hidden microphone under my collar captured every single syllable. She had just explicitly threatened to destroy my career and bury me in fraudulent litigation to coerce me into signing a legal document. That was textbook criminal extortion. She was handing me the exact weapon I needed. I picked up my pen. I let my hand shake violently and act worthy of a Hollywood award. I slowly signed my name at the bottom of the non-disclosure agreement. Legally, an agreement signed under documented duress to cover up a crime was entirely unenforceable. But Catherine did not know I was recording. To her, this was a legally binding victory. I picked up the $50,000 check and slipped it into my purse, playing the part of the desperate wife taking whatever scraps she was thrown. Catherine immediately snatched the signed document off the table, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. Smart girl, Catherine said, standing up and smoothing her jacket. Now I expect you to be entirely out of the state by the end of the week. Do not ever contact my son again. She turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me sitting alone. I waited until her black luxury SUV pulled away from the curb outside. Then I sat up perfectly straight. I tapped the microphone hidden under my collar. Did you get all of that, Jamal? I asked, my voice completely steady and cold. Loud and clear. Claire, his voice crackled through the tiny earpiece hidden in my ear. We have her on tape committing federal extortion. I smiled, taking a sip of my coffee. The trap was finally set. When I returned to Jamal House an hour later, the atmosphere in his home office was electric. I pulled the microscopic microphone from under my collar and handed it to him. He plugged the receiver into his computer tower and played the audio file back for us. Catherine's cold, arrogant voice filled the room, explicitly threatening to ruin my career and bury me in fraudulent legal debt if I refused to sign her non-disclosure agreement. Nicole shook her head in disbelief. She said it out loud, she whispered. She handed you a signed confession of extortion. I pulled the cashier check out of my purse and laid it flat on the desk. $50,000, I said. That is what she thinks my life is worth. But we are not going to cash this. It is going straight into the evidence file along with the audio recording and the signed agreement. Now we need to connect the final dots. Did you find out where the money from the charity went? Jamal turned back to his monitors. While you were getting threatened over coffee, I did some deep digging into Horizon Consulting Group, the shell company receiving the bulk of the embezzled funds. Shell companies still have to pay property taxes if they own real estate. He brought up a public county tax record on the center screen. 6 months ago, Horizon Consulting Group purchased a luxury townhouse in the Gold Coast neighborhood, paid in cash, $3.2 million. I pulled the utility records for that specific address. Guess whose name is on the electric bill? He clicked another file. The name highlighted in bright yellow was Vanessa. My stomach twisted, but my mind remained sharp. Catherine was not hoarding the charity money. She had used millions meant for community programs to buy a home for her son, pregnant mistress. They were building their perfect family using stolen funds. This is perfect, I said, leaning closer. We have the financial trail, we have the text messages, we have the extortion on tape. But if we are going to expose them publicly, we need undeniable visual proof of Richard and Vanessa colluding. Something that shows Richard knew exactly what was happening. Jamal rubbed his chin. They are probably being careful in public to maintain the illusion, but they work together every single day. The clinic. I said, a sudden realization hitting me. I set up the entire IT infrastructure for Richard Medical Practice 3 years ago. I hired the contractors to install security cameras. Richard never bothered to learn how the system works. He just wanted to make sure his employees were not stealing supplies. I grabbed a notepad from Jamal's desk and scribbled down an IP address and a string of alphanumeric characters. These are the administrator credentials for the clinic server. I created a backdoor access point for myself to run remote software updates. Can you get us into the live camera feeds? Jamal grinned, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. Claire, you are a genius, he said. Give me 30 seconds. He rapidly typed lines of code into a black terminal window. A moment later, the right monitor flickered, displaying a grid of high-definition camera feeds from inside the medical clinic. There was the reception area, the hallway, and most importantly, Richard's private corner office. Jamal double-clicked the feed for the private office, expanding it to fill the entire screen. He turned up the audio feed. Richard was sitting behind his oak desk wearing his pristine doctor coat. Vanessa was sitting casually on the edge of the desk right next to him. She was wearing a comfortable maternity dress, and her hand was resting proudly on her swollen belly. Did my mother call you? Richard asked, leaning back in his leather chair. Vanessa smiled, running her fingers through his hair. Yes. She said. Claire signed the agreement and took the check. She looked absolutely pathetic. Your mother told her to leave the state. Richard let out a sigh of relief, running his hands over his face. Thank God, he said. I thought she was going to fight us for the clinic shares. I thought she was going to drag this out and ruin everything. Vanessa leaned and kissed him. You do not have to worry about her anymore, Richard. We finally got rid of her. In 3 months, the divorce will be finalized quietly. Then we can announce the baby. Everything is going exactly according to plan. I stared at the screen, watching my husband kiss his pregnant mistress in the office I had paid for. The audacity of their conversation was staggering. They truly believed they had committed the perfect crime. They had no idea they were starring in their own downfall. Jamal, I need you to rip that entire video file right now, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence in the room. I want the audio crystal clear. I want the timestamp verified. And I want it linked directly to the financial ledger showing the purchase of Vanessa Townhouse. Jamal did not need to be told twice. His fingers blurred across the keyboard as he captured the live feed, isolated the video, and backed it up to our offline server. Nicole was pacing frantically behind us, her hands shaking as she processed the sheer magnitude of her brother and his betrayal. They are actually going to get away with it, Nicole whispered, her voice cracking. If Richard files the finalized paperwork next month, with that fake morality clause triggered, he takes everything. And Catherine gets to keep embezzling from the charity to fund his new life. I turned away from the monitor and looked directly at her. No, Nicole. They are not going to get away with anything. We now have the ultimate weapon. We have undeniable proof of adultery, which nullifies their attempt to use the prenuptial agreement. More importantly, we have the federal fraud trail. We have wire transfers, shell companies, and the audio recording of Catherine committing extortion. So what is the next step? Jamal asked, leaning back in his chair. Do we take all of this to the police? Or do we send it to your divorce lawyer and let them bleed Richard dry in civil court? I shook my head firmly. If we take this to the police, Catherine will hire the best defense attorneys. They will tie the evidence up for years. They will claim the audio was recorded illegally. They will say the drives were tampered with. If we go to a divorce judge, Richard's lawyers will demand a closed courtroom to protect his practice. They will bury the truth under endless legal motions. I walked over to the window. If we want justice, we cannot fight them in a courtroom where they own the referee. We have to fight them in the one place they cannot control, the court of public opinion. We need a stage so large and an audience so powerful that all of Catherine money cannot buy her way out of the consequences. Jamal raised an eyebrow. What kind of stage are you talking about, Claire? Before I could answer, the sharp ring of the front doorbell echoed through the house. We all froze. Nicole walked cautiously out of the home office and down the hallway to the front door. I followed closely behind her. She looked through the peephole, then unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door wide open. A courier wearing a crisp uniform stood on the porch. He was holding a thick cream-colored envelope. "Delivery for Claire," he said routinely. I stepped forward and took the envelope. It was heavy, made of premium cardstock. I recognized the wax seal on the back immediately. It was the official crest of the Family Charity Foundation. I closed the door, broke the wax seal with my thumb, and carefully pulled out the contents. It was a gold, embossed invitation. The elegant calligraphy announced the family annual charity gala, scheduled for this coming Saturday night, at the most exclusive country club in the city. This was Catherine's crowning event of the year, a massive gathering of billionaires, politicians, and hospital board directors, where she paraded her philanthropic achievements for the press. A small piece of personal stationery fell out from between the invitation and fluttered to the floor. I picked it up. It was a handwritten note from Catherine. Her cursive handwriting was elegant, but the message was pure venom. It read, "I am sending you this to remind you of the world you no longer belong to. Your name has been permanently removed from the guest list and given to someone who actually deserves to be there. Stay away, trash." Nicole read the note over my shoulder and gasped. She is so unbelievably cruel. She is probably bringing Vanessa as Richard's official date. I looked at the gold-embossed invitation, then down at the hateful handwritten note. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face for the first time in days. The perfect stage had just presented itself on a silver platter. All of Catherine's wealthy donors, all of Richard's hospital board members, and all of the local press would be in one room. Claire Jamal asked, stepping into the hallway. "What is it?" I handed the note to Nicole and held up the gala invitation. "Catherine just invited us to her own execution," I said, my smile widening. "She told me to stay away, but I would absolutely not miss it for the world." Saturday evening arrived with a crisp chill. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the guest bedroom examining my reflection. I was not wearing the conservative gowns Catherine usually forced me to buy. Tonight I was wearing a dress I bought months ago, but never had the courage to wear. It was a floor-length silk gown in a deep, striking emerald green. The color perfectly complemented my features, but more importantly, it was the exact shade of the coat Catherine wore when she set up my fake cheating photos. It was a calculated psychological strike. The dress hugged my figure, featuring an elegant open back and a thigh-high slit that allowed for commanding movement. I paired it with my signature rose gold watch, the jewelry that proved their narrative was a lie, and black stiletto heels. My makeup was razor sharp. I did not look like a defeated ex-wife. I looked like an executioner. Jamal knocked gently on the doorframe. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that made him look like a Secret Service agent. Nicole stepped up beside him in a stunning navy blue dress. We did not need to say anything. We walked out to his black SUV and drove toward the Oakwood Hills Country Club. The drive was completely silent. When we pulled up to the grand entrance, the valet line was packed with luxury vehicles. Photographers from local society magazines were aggressively flashing their cameras near the velvet ropes. The country club was a massive estate with towering white columns and manicured hedges. It was a fortress of generational wealth that had always made me feel like an imposter. But not tonight. Jamal handed his keys to the valet. He offered me his right arm, and Nicole took his left. Together we walked up the sweeping marble staircase toward the massive mahogany double doors. Two ushers in crisp white gloves pulled the doors open. The main ballroom was visually spectacular. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a golden glow over hundreds of attendees. Waiters carrying silver trays of expensive champagne wove seamlessly through the thick crowd of billionaires, politicians, and socialites. A live string quartet was playing classical music in the far corner. I took a deep breath, let go of Jamal's arm, and took my first step down the grand staircase leading into the sunken ballroom. I walked slightly ahead of Jamal and Nicole, stepping directly into the light. The moment the chandeliers caught the emerald silk of my dress, heads began to turn. It started near the bottom of the stairs and rippled outward through the room like a physical wave. Conversations abruptly stopped mid-sentence. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased entirely. For a surreal electric moment, even the string quartet seemed to falter, missing a clear beat, as the cellist looked up in absolute surprise. I kept my chin perfectly level, my eyes sweeping over the crowd with absolute confidence. I could feel the heavy weight of 100 stares pressing against my skin. I saw the chief financial officer who had fired me 3 days ago, standing near an elaborate ice sculpture. His jaw dropped slightly before he quickly looked down at his polished shoes. I saw the charity board members who had texted me fake apologies leaning in to whisper furiously to their spouses. The toxic gossip hit the air immediately, a low buzzing hum of scandalized whispers echoing off the marble walls. They were expecting me to be hiding in a cheap apartment, drowning in shame. They were absolutely not expecting me to walk into the most exclusive event of the year, looking like I owned the building. "Look at her," a woman in a silver sequined dress hissed loudly to her companion as I walked past. I heard she slept with 3 of her corporate clients just to secure audit contracts. She has no shame showing her face here. I did not flinch. I did not break my stride. I stopped, turned to the woman, and offered her a cold, polite smile that made her instantly turn away in deep embarrassment. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and took a slow, deliberate sip. I felt Jamal step up close behind my right shoulder. "Target acquired," he murmured quietly. I followed his gaze directly across the sea of expensive suits and designer gowns. Standing near the main presentation stage holding court with a group of wealthy hospital investors was Catherine. She was wearing a massive diamond necklace and her signature smug expression. Beside her stood Richard, looking perfectly groomed and entirely oblivious to my arrival. And standing just behind Richard, holding a clipboard and trying to look inconspicuous, was Vanessa. The entire cast of my tragedy was assembled in one place. The curtain was finally about to rise. I began my approach across the ballroom floor, Jamal walking confidently on my right and Nicole on my left. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea, giving me a clear, unobstructed path toward the stage. Catherine was in the middle of a boisterous laugh, charming a silver-haired state senator, when her eyes caught the sudden movement in the crowd. Her laughter died instantly. The heavy diamond necklace seemed to tighten around her throat, as her face contorted from aristocratic charm to raw, unfiltered panic. She aggressively tapped Richard on the shoulder. He turned still, holding a crystal glass of scotch, and froze completely. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter under the pressure. But it was Vanessa who reacted with actual calculated movement. She set her clipboard down on a high cocktail table, her eyes narrowing with vicious intent. She saw me not as a defeated ex-wife, but as a direct threat to the massive fortune she was currently incubating. Vanessa stepped away from Richard and deliberately intercepted my path. She flagged down a passing waiter and smoothly lifted a full glass of dark Cabernet Sauvignon from his silver tray. I saw the cold calculation in her eyes. As a financial auditor, I read physical cues the same way I read tax returns. I knew exactly what she was going to do 3 seconds before she actually did it. But I did not alter my course. I let her approach. She stepped directly into my path, pretending to look over her shoulder at the stage, and then swung her arm violently back. The dark red wine flew from the crystal glass in a wide arc, splashing heavily across the front of my emerald silk gown. The liquid soaked into the expensive fabric, instantly leaving dark, ruinous stains down my waist and thigh. The cold wine seeped through to my skin, a stark contrast to the boiling anger in my chest. Several people nearby gasped loudly. A hush fell over our immediate section of the ballroom. Jamal tensed beside me, his large frame shifting as if preparing to intervene, but I raised a single finger to stop him. This was my battle, and I was going to fight it my way. "Oh my goodness," Vanessa gasped, her voice artificially loud to ensure everyone in our vicinity heard her fake apology. "I am so incredibly sorry. I did not see you there. But then again, no one expected you to be here. You really should not wear fine silk if you are so prone to making a complete mess of yourself. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, under the guise of trying to hand me a tiny, useless cocktail napkin. She dropped the theatrical volume and lowered her voice to a venomous whisper, meant only for me. "You do not belong here anymore, Claire," she hissed, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Richard is done with you. Take your cheap little settlement check and crawl back to whatever pathetic neighborhood you came from. Trash like you should never wear our colors anyway." The old Claire might have slapped her across the face. The old Claire might have turned around and run to the bathroom in tears of humiliation. But the woman standing in that ballroom was a loaded weapon with the safety turned completely off. I did not break eye contact. I did not even look down at the ruined dress. Instead, I took a half step forward, closing the distance between us, until we were mere inches apart. I leaned in, bringing my lips right next to her ear. I could smell her expensive perfume, the exact same brand Catherine always wore. "You are extremely bold for a woman who is 31 weeks pregnant," I whispered, my voice completely smooth and chillingly calm. "Let us do the math. That puts your exact due date on January the 12th. A winter baby. How beautiful for you and Richard. I just wonder if you are going to set up the nursery in that new luxury townhouse on the Gold Coast. You know, the property registered to Horizon Consulting Group, purchased with $3.2 million of stolen charity funds." I pulled back just enough to watch the physical reaction. It was absolutely spectacular. The smug, victorious smirk vanished from Vanessa's face, as if it had been wiped away by a physical blow. The blood drained from her cheeks so fast she looked like a ghost standing under the bright crystal chandeliers. Her eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. She opened her mouth, but only a dry, choking sound came out. Her free hand instinctively flew down to protect her swollen belly, a protective movement I was certain several sharp-eyed socialites in the crowd noticed immediately. She took a stumbling step backward, the empty wine glass shaking violently in her trembling fingers. "You look a little pale, Vanessa," I said, raising my voice back to a conversational volume for the surrounding guests to hear clearly. "You should really sit down and drink some water. Extreme stress is incredibly dangerous for someone in your delicate condition." I offered her a brilliant, terrifying smile. Then, completely ignoring the dark stains soaking my dress, I walked right past her paralyzed form and continued my steady, unrelenting march straight toward the stage. I had only taken 5 more steps toward the main stage when a heavy hand clamped down hard on my upper arm. The grip was tight enough to bruise fingers digging painfully into my skin through the ruined silk of my dress. Before I could even turn my head, I was violently yanked to the right. Richard dragged me past a towering floral arrangement and shoved me behind a thick velvet curtain that sectioned off a private alcove near the kitchen entrance. The heavy fabric swung shut, plunging us into dim light and temporarily muffling the loud chatter of the ballroom. Richard stood between me and the curtain, his chest heaving. His perfectly styled hair was suddenly disheveled, and the veins in his neck were visibly throbbing against his tight tuxedo collar. He looked absolutely frantic, a stark contrast to the smug aristocrat who had thrown divorce papers at me just a few days ago. "Are you completely insane?" Richard hissed, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "What are you doing here, Claire? You signed the agreement. My mother gave you the check. You were supposed to pack your cheap bags and disappear. I am calling building security right now and having you dragged out of here in handcuffs." He reached into his tuxedo jacket for his phone, expecting me to cower, expecting me to beg him not to cause a scene. He expected the same obedient wife who had quietly balanced his ledgers and swallowed his mother insults for 5 years. I reached out and forcefully slapped his hand away from his jacket pocket. The sharp smack echoed in the small alcove. Richard froze, staring at me in absolute shock. I had never laid a hand on him in anger before. "Call them!" I challenged, my voice deadly, calm, stripping away every ounce of respect I had ever shown him. "Call security." Richard, let them drag me out. And while they do, I will loudly explain to the entire room, including your hospital investors, exactly why your heavily pregnant mistress just threw a glass of wine on me. His face went entirely slack. The threat of public exposure was the only thing that could ever pierce his thick armor of entitlement. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting back toward the velvet curtain, as if terrified someone was already listening. "You do not know what you are talking about," he stammered, though his voice lacked any real conviction. "You are delusional. Stop playing the brilliant surgeon," Richard I snapped, stepping closer and forcing him to back up against the wall. "You are terrible at it. I know everything. I know about Vanessa. I know about the baby. I know the cheating scandal was a pathetic manufactured lie to trigger the morality clause so you could keep my clinic shares and start your new family without losing a dime." He opened his mouth, but I did not give him a single second to formulate another lie. "You are 35 years old," I continued my words, hitting him like physical blows, "and you are still absolutely nothing without a woman propping you up. When your mother cut you off, you came crying to me. I took my hard-earned savings and bought the lease for your medical practice. I built your billing infrastructure. I handled your corporate taxes. I made you look like a successful, independent man. But you are not independent. You are just a parasite moving from one host to the next." Richard stared at me, his eyes wide and panicked. The golden boy facade was completely gone, leaving only a terrified, insecure man-child. "And when you got Vanessa pregnant and realized I would take half of the clinic in a divorce, what did you do?" I asked, leaning in closer. "Did you act like a man and face the consequences of your own infidelity?" "No. You ran straight back to Mommy. You hid behind Catherine's skirts and let her do your dirty work. You let her hire the private investigators. You let her threaten my clients. You are a coward, Richard. A weak, pathetic coward who cannot even manage his own affairs." "I do not need you," he spat back, though his voice cracked humiliatingly. "I have the clinic. I have my mother trust fund. You are nothing to me." "You really think Catherine is protecting you?" I asked, letting a cold, mocking laugh escape my lips. "You really think she bought that townhouse for Vanessa out of the goodness of her heart? You are a puppet, Richard, and you are so completely blinded by your own arrogance that you cannot see the strings." I reached out and adjusted his crooked bow tie, patting his chest firmly. "Enjoy the gala, golden boy," I whispered. "It is going to be the last party you ever attend where people actually respect you." I turned my back on him, pushed the heavy velvet curtain aside and stepped back out into the brilliant light of the ballroom. I left him standing in the shadows, completely paralyzed, gasping for air, as if I had just ripped the oxygen straight out of his lungs. As I walked back onto the main floor, a loud chime echoed through the room. A waiter was striking a crystal glass with a silver spoon. The crowd began to naturally gravitate toward the massive stage at the far end of the hall. The main event was finally starting. It was time to give Catherine the spotlight she so desperately craved. I navigated through the sea of whispering guests and found Jamal and Nicole standing near the front of the stage. Jamal gave me a slight nod, his eyes scanning the perimeter like a hawk. Nicole reached out and gave my hand a quick, reassuring squeeze. I looked up at the massive stage. It was draped in heavy white silk and flanked by towering columns of white roses. A giant projection screen dominated the backdrop, currently displaying the elegant gold crest of the Family Charity Foundation. The murmurs of the crowd faded into absolute silence as Catherine gracefully climbed the steps to the podium. She had perfectly recovered from the shock of seeing me in the ballroom. She adjusted the microphone, a practiced, benevolent smile spreading across her face. The bright stage lights caught the heavy diamonds around her neck, making them sparkle like shards of ice. "Welcome, distinguished guests, friends and family." Catherine began, her voice echoing powerfully through the state-of-the-art sound system. Her tone was completely different from the venomous hiss she had used at the coffee shop. It was warm, inviting, and dripping with manufactured sincerity. "Tonight we gather not just to celebrate the achievements of our foundation, but to honor the very cornerstone of our success: integrity." I felt my stomach churn at the word. The sheer audacity of a woman who had embezzled $4 million standing in front of the city elite and lecturing them on integrity was staggering. For over 4 decades, our family has dedicated itself to the betterment of this city. Catherine continued, placing a hand over her heart. We have built hospitals. We have funded community programs. We have lifted up those who could not lift themselves. But philanthropy is not just about writing checks. It is about moral character. It is about family values. It is about setting an example of unwavering righteousness in a world that so often loses its way. The crowd nodded in solemn agreement. A few wealthy socialites near the front row actually dabbed their eyes with expensive linen handkerchiefs. Catherine was a master manipulator, playing the room like a perfectly tuned instrument. Recently, our family has faced our own severe trials, she said, lowering her voice to a somber, emotional pitch. Her eyes briefly scanned the crowd, deliberately ignoring my presence in the front row. We have endured betrayal from those we trusted most. We have learned the hard way that not everyone shares our absolute commitment to honesty and marital fidelity. A fresh wave of whispers rippled through the ballroom. People turned their heads, trying to spot me in the crowd. She was actively weaponizing the fake cheating scandal on a public stage, using my supposed infidelity to make herself and her family look like tragic noble victims. It was a brilliant, highly calculated public relations move. By making herself the victim of a lying daughter-in-law, she cemented the loyalty and sympathy of her billionaire donors. But true families do not break under pressure, Catherine declared, her voice rising in a crescendo of triumph. We rely on our faith, our bond, and our unshakable moral compass. And that brings me to the most important announcement of the evening. She paused dramatically, turning her head toward the velvet curtain on the side of the stage. After many years of leading this incredible foundation, I have decided it is time to step down as director, Catherine announced, smiling warmly. It is time to pass the torch to the next generation, to a man who exemplifies everything our family stands for. A brilliant surgeon, a devoted son, and a man of absolute uncompromising honor. Please welcome the new director of the Family Charity Trust, my son, Dr. Richard Montgomery. The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. Richard slowly walked out from behind the velvet curtain. He looked incredibly pale and his smile was tight and forced. The confident, arrogant swagger he usually carried was completely gone, replaced by the nervous, jerky movements of a man walking straight to the gallows. He had just heard my threat in the alcove. He knew exactly what I was capable of, and he knew I was standing right in the front row watching him. He stepped up to the podium and embraced his mother. The crowd cheered louder, completely oblivious to the rotting core of the family they were applauding. Catherine beamed with absolute pride, raising Richard hand in the air like a victorious prize fighter. They stood there, soaking in the adulation, basking in the warm glow of their own lies. I looked at Jamal, who held his phone near his waist thumb, hovering over the bright screen. The trap was fully prepared. They believed they were completely untouchable. They were incredibly wrong. The curtain was falling. The applause slowly died down as Richard leaned into the microphone. He cleared his throat, his eyes darting frantically across the front row until they locked directly onto mine. I offered him a slow, deliberate smile. The color completely drained from his face again. He gripped the edges of the wooden podium so tightly his knuckles turned white. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a steep cliff, waiting for a strong gust of wind to push him over the edge into the abyss. Thank you. Richard stammered, his voice lacking the powerful, commanding resonance his mother had just demonstrated so effortlessly. It is an incredible honor to step into this role today. My mother has built a legacy of unparalleled transparency and absolute dedication to this community. He choked slightly on the word transparency. He knew I was the only person in the room who understood exactly how hollow and hypocritical that word truly was. I watched him swallow hard, his throat bobbing nervously above his expensive silk bow tie. He glanced over to the side of the stage where Vanessa was standing near the heavy velvet curtains. She was no longer looking at him with adoring, supportive eyes. She was staring directly at me, her arms wrapped defensively over her stomach, her face still pale and stricken from our brief encounter in the ballroom. She knew something was terribly wrong, but she had absolutely no idea the magnitude of the storm that was about to hit them both. While Richard stumbled through his heavily rehearsed speech about community outreach and family duty, I shifted my attention to the far left corner of the expansive ballroom. A small team of audio-visual technicians was clustered around a massive soundboard and projection control desk, hidden safely in the shadows behind a row of tall potted palms. Standing right in the middle of them, wearing a black polo shirt, dark slacks, and a professional communication headset, was Jamal. He blended in perfectly with the event staff. Earlier in the evening, while the elite guests were busy drinking imported champagne and gossiping about my ruined reputation, Jamal had put his brilliant cybersecurity skills to physical use. He had quietly intercepted the main high-definition video feed running from the control desk to the massive projector hanging from the vaulted ceiling. Working quickly in the dark, he had hardwired a secure bypass receiver directly into the internal system, effectively hijacking the entire visual display of the venue. The remote control panel for that bypass receiver was currently glowing quietly on the screen of the small digital tablet, hidden inside my emerald clutch purse. Richard mercifully wrapped up his brief, uninspiring speech to a round of polite applause from the audience. He looked desperate to step away from the microphone and escape the heavy scrutiny of my unblinking gaze. But Catherine immediately stepped back up to the podium, gently but firmly pushing her son aside to reclaim the spotlight. She simply could not let him have the final word. She was the grand architect of this empire, and she demanded the final bow for herself. She raised both her hands, commanding the wealthy crowd to quiet down. Before we open the dance floor and begin the silent auction, Catherine announced, her voice echoing perfectly through the massive room. I want to share a visual journey with all of you. Our production team has spent the last month putting together a short film highlighting the greatest achievements of the Family Foundation over the past 12 months. It is a beautiful testament to what we can accomplish when we prioritize morality, family loyalty, and the greater good of this great city. Catherine gestured expansively toward the back of the room. The technicians at the soundboard hit a switch, and the massive crystal chandeliers above us slowly dimmed until they were nothing more than a faint golden glow. The ballroom was plunged into an intimate cinematic darkness. A heavy hush fell over the crowd of billionaires and politicians as everyone turned their attention toward the giant 20-foot projection screen dominating the wall directly behind the stage. I looked over at the shadows where the tech crew was stationed. Jamal caught my eye through the darkness. He tapped his headset twice with his index finger, then gave me a single sharp nod. The system was completely locked. The official charity video containing footage of smiling children and ribbon-cutting ceremonies was successfully blocked from the main feed. My tablet was now the sole broadcasting device connected to the projector. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the small digital tablet. The screen illuminated my face with a faint, cool blue light. I swiped past the lock screen and pulled up the master presentation file Jamal and I had meticulously built the night before. My thumb hovered right over the play icon. Up on the stage, Catherine smiled radiantly at the audience. She looked toward the control desk in the back, entirely unaware that her empire had already been infiltrated. "Please, Catherine," commanded her voice ringing out crystal clear in the quiet, expectant darkness. "Roll the video. Let us show everyone exactly who we really are." I looked up at Catherine standing proudly in her diamonds, then down at the glowing screen in my hands. With pleasure, I whispered to myself. I pressed my thumb firmly against the enter key. Instantly, the massive projector hanging from the vaulted ceiling hummed to life. A brilliant beam of piercing white light cut through the darkened ballroom, hitting the 20-foot screen directly behind the stage. The crowd of billionaires, politicians, and socialites fell completely silent, settling in with polite smiles. They fully expected to watch a heartwarming montage of smiling children, newly built community centers, and ribbon-cutting ceremonies, celebrating Catherine's endless generosity. Instead, the screen filled with the crisp, high-definition security footage from Richard's private corner office at the medical clinic. The timestamp in the bottom corner glowed bright red, proving the video was recorded just 24 hours ago. The audio kicked in, perfectly balanced, and amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, designed to carry classical music to every single corner of the massive room. Every word was devastatingly clear. "Did my mother call you?" Richard's voice boomed through the ballroom, vibrating against the marble floors. On the giant screen, Richard was sitting casually behind his heavy oak desk, looking relaxed and arrogant. Vanessa was perched right on the edge of the desk next to him. She was wearing her tight maternity dress, her hand resting protectively and proudly on her swollen belly. A collective sharp gasp rippled through the front rows of the audience like a sudden gust of wind. The wealthy women who had just been dabbing their eyes with linen handkerchiefs during Catherine's speech suddenly froze, their jaws dropping in unison. The clinking of glasses ceased entirely. "Yes," Vanessa's voice echoed back, undeniably hers. She said Claire signed the agreement and took the check. She looked absolutely pathetic. "Your mother told her to leave the state." The ballroom erupted. It started as a low murmur of profound shock and instantly escalated into a chaotic roar of scandalized voices. The silver-haired state senator, who had been laughing with Catherine just 20 minutes earlier, physically took a step back from the stage, looking up at the screen in pure, unadulterated horror. This was not a rumor whispered over martinis at the country club. This was absolute, undeniable visual proof of infidelity, cruelty, and manipulation broadcasted in high definition to the most powerful people in the city. Thank God the cinematic version of Richard sighed heavily on screen, running his hands over his face. "I thought she was going to fight us for the clinic shares. I thought she was going to drag this out and ruin everything." On the stage, the real Richard looked like he had been struck by a physical blow. He staggered backward, his polished dress shoes slipping slightly on the smooth wooden floor. He bumped hard into the podium, sending the microphone stand wobbling. His eyes were wide, staring up at his own face on the massive screen. He opened his mouth, but he was completely paralyzed. The Golden Boy facade was entirely stripped away, leaving a terrified, exposed fraud. He looked down at the crowd, then over at me, standing in the front row in my ruined emerald dress. I did not blink. I just offered him a cold, hard stare as I watched his entire world crumble. Vanessa leaned in and kissed him on the screen. "You do not have to worry about her anymore, Richard. We finally got rid of her. In 3 months, the divorce will be finalized quietly. Then we can announce the baby." The real Vanessa, standing near the velvet curtains on the side of the stage, let out a piercing, hysterical sob. She covered her face with both hands, tears streaming down her carefully powdered cheeks, smearing her expensive makeup. The glamorous, victorious illusion she had built for herself shattered into a million sharp pieces. She turned and tried to run behind the heavy curtain to hide, but her high heel caught on the fabric. She stumbled awkwardly against the stage rigging, weeping loudly. The elite crowd watched her with a brutal mixture of disgust and ravenous curiosity. "Turn it off!" Catherine suddenly screamed. Her benevolent, charitable persona was completely gone, replaced by a frantic, screeching panic. She lunged toward the edge of the stage, her heavy diamond necklace swinging wildly. She waved her arms frantically at the technicians hidden in the back of the room. "Cut the power! Turn that screen off right now! Security, get them away from the soundboard." But Jamal was in complete control of the system. He ignored her entirely, his fingers executing the next phase of our sequence. The video feed of the clinic office abruptly cut out. The screen went black for a fraction of a second before a new image flashed across the 20-foot display. It was a scanned medical document pulled directly from the hidden files on Richard's secret burner phone. It was a non-invasive prenatal paternity test from a highly exclusive private laboratory. Jamal had digitally highlighted the most critical sections of the document in bright yellow, so even the guests standing near the exit doors could read it clearly. Alleged father Dr. Richard Montgomery, Probability of paternity 99.9%. The murmurs in the ballroom turned into absolute pandemonium. Investors from Richard Hospital Board were already pulling out their cell phones, furiously typing messages, and stepping away from the stage to distance themselves from the imploding family. The sheer hypocrisy of Catherine's speech about family values and unshakable moral compasses was now a humiliating public joke. She had just introduced a man who was actively hiding a pregnant mistress while trying to financially ruin his lawful wife. Catherine stood frozen at the edge of the stage, her chest heaving as she stared at the giant medical document proving her son adultery. She looked like a queen watching her castle burn. But this was only the first strike. The adultery merely destroyed their social standing and invalidated the prenuptial agreement. I reached into my clutch and placed my thumb back over the digital tablet screen. It was time to destroy their freedom. I pressed the enter key for the second time. Behind me, the massive screen flickered, dropping the medical documents and replacing them with my world. Spreadsheets, financial flow charts, bank routing numbers. Catherine was completely unhinged now. She shrieked at the top of her lungs, pointing a trembling finger at the audiovisual booth. "Rip the cords out of the wall!" She screamed, her voice cracking in pure desperation. "I said cut the power right now!" Two burly security guards in dark suits rushed toward the back of the ballroom, but Jamal had anticipated this exact physical response. He had already locked the control room door from the inside and reinforced it with a heavy metal chair. He was secure, and my presentation was unstoppable. I did not wait for the crowd to recover from the shock of the paternity test. I walked purposefully toward the stage, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. The audience parted for me instinctively. I climbed the short flight of stairs. Richard was still gripping the edges of the wooden podium, hyperventilating. I walked right up to him, reached out and pried his fingers off the microphone stand. He did not even try to resist. He just backed away, his eyes wide and hollow. I adjusted the microphone to my height. The sharp whine of feedback echoed through the ballroom, instantly silencing the chaotic murmurs of the crowd. "Please keep your seats," I said, my voice projecting with absolute authority and total calm. "The evening is far from over. We have just established that the new director of your charity is a man who builds his life on deceit. But let us talk about the outgoing director. Let us talk about the woman who just stood on this stage and lectured you about integrity. Let us talk about exactly where your generous financial donations have been going." I swiped my finger across the digital tablet in my hand. The massive screen behind me transitioned into a beautifully color-coded, high-contrast financial flowchart. It was designed specifically for this audience. These were billionaires, hedge fund managers, and corporate executives. They understood money better than anyone else in the city, and they instantly recognized the structure of a money laundering operation. As an independent financial auditor, I have a deep appreciation for clean ledgers, I announced, looking out over the sea of shocked faces. Unfortunately, the ledgers for this family charity are anything but clean. Over the last 48 months, Catherine has systematically siphoned exactly $4.2 million out of your tax-exempt foundation. A collective gasp of genuine outrage swept through the room. Adultery was a social scandal, but stealing money from other rich people was an unforgivable sin in this circle. I pointed to the screen. "You will see regular monthly wire transfers masked as administrative expenses and community outreach grants," I explained, pacing the stage like a CEO delivering a keynote address. "These funds never reached any hospitals. They were wired directly into a series of shell companies registered in Delaware. The primary entity, Horizon Consulting Group, received the bulk of the embezzled cash." Catherine lunged at me. She scrambled across the stage, her manicured hands curled into claws. Her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "Shut up, you lying tramp," she shrieked, aiming straight for the microphone. I did not flinch. I simply took one smooth step backward. Catherine missed me completely, her high heel catching the thick black audio cable taped to the floor. She tripped forward, crashing hard onto her hands and knees in front of the entire ballroom. Her heavy diamond necklace snapped, scattering precious stones across the wooden stage like pieces of shattered ice. I looked down at her, then back out at the audience. I tapped my tablet again. The screen shifted, displaying the official property deed for a luxury townhouse in the Gold Coast neighborhood. I had digitally highlighted the purchase price and the name of the registered occupant. 6 months ago, Horizon Consulting Group purchased this property in cash for $3.2 million. I narrated, my voice echoing relentlessly above Catherine's sobbing. The woman living in that townhouse, the woman whose name is on every utility bill, is Vanessa. Richard, pregnant mistress. Catherine orchestrated a massive federal wire fraud scheme to buy a secret home for her son, illicit family, using the money you donated to help sick children. The ballroom exploded with fury. The silver-haired state senator threw his crystal glass onto the floor, the glass shattering violently. Several hospital board investors were already shouting, pointing accusing fingers at the stage. They were calculating their losses, realizing they had been used to fund a cheap tawdry affair. I swiped my tablet one final time. To silence any doubts, let me play you a recording from yesterday morning, I said. Catherine discovered I knew about her shell companies. She invited me to a coffee shop and tried to force me to sign an illegal non-disclosure agreement to permanently cover her tracks. Catherine's arrogant, icy voice suddenly filled the room, played back with crystal-clear digital audio. If you do not sign this right now, I will personally ensure that every corporate board in this city receives an anonymous dossier. You will never work as an auditor again. I will bury you in so much legal debt you will be bankrupt by Christmas. The recording stopped, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. That I said into the microphone, my eyes locking directly onto the wealthy donors, is the sound of your benevolent charity director committing federal extortion to protect a federal fraud. My audit is officially complete. I placed the microphone gently back onto the stand. Catherine was still on the floor, weeping uncontrollably, desperately trying to gather her scattered diamonds. I turned my back on her and looked at Richard. He had collapsed against the velvet curtains, sliding down to the floor, his head buried in his hands. Their empire was completely, utterly destroyed. I walked down the short flight of stairs, leaving the stage behind me. The silence that had gripped the ballroom during the audio recording finally broke, replaced by a deafening roar of outrage and panic. It was not just gossip anymore. It was a financial massacre, and every single billionaire in that room knew their own reputations were now tied to a massive federal crime. Up on the stage, Catherine finally abandoned her frantic search for her broken diamonds. She pushed herself up from the floor. Her pristine charcoal gown ruined her hair, completely disheveled. The polished aristocratic mask was gone, revealing the feral, desperate woman underneath. She looked at the wealthy crowd turning violently against her, then her eyes locked onto Richard. He was still sitting on the floor against the velvet curtain, completely paralyzed by his own cowardice. Catherine marched over to him. She did not offer him a hand up. She did not offer a motherly word of comfort. She pulled her arm back and slapped him squarely across the face. The sound was as sharp as a gunshot, echoing through the microphone that was still active on the podium. "You stupid, useless boy," she screamed, her voice completely unhinged. "You ruined everything. You could not even keep your zipper closed. I stole that money for you. I risked everything to protect your pathetic medical practice, and you threw it all away for a cheap assistant." Richard just took the hit. His cheek turned bright red, but he said nothing. He simply pulled his knees to his chest, like a frightened child refusing to look his mother in the eye. Down on the ballroom floor, the panic was absolute. The state senator was physically pushing his way through the crowd toward the exit doors, shouting at his aides to draft a press release, distancing his campaign from the Montgomery family immediately. The hospital board members were practically screaming into their cell phones. I watched the chief financial officer, who had fired me just days ago, pacing near the ice sculpture. His face was completely pale as he frantically dialed his corporate legal team. They all knew the federal authorities would be combing through every single donation they had ever made to Catherine Charity. The social contagion was spreading rapidly, and they were all desperate to cut off the infected limbs. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. She had slipped out through the kitchen's service doors, The moment the paternity test hit the giant screen, abandoning Richard entirely to save herself. So much for their perfect, loyal new family. I stood near the center of the room, an island of calm, in a sea of absolute destruction. Jamal and Nicole walked over to stand beside me. Nicole watched her mother screaming on stage, tears silently streaming down her face, but she did not move to intervene. She knew this had to happen. Jamal was holding his phone, looking down at the screen with a deeply satisfied smile. "It is done," he said quietly, leaning in so only I could hear. I forwarded the entire decrypted folder, the ledgers, the offshore routing numbers, and the audio recording to the white-collar crime division of the FBI 4 hours ago. I told them exactly what time Catherine would be making a public confession. Right on cue, the massive floor-to-ceiling windows along the front wall of the ballroom began to flash. Red and blue lights cut through the darkness of the evening, reflecting off the crystal chandeliers and the imported marble floors. It was not just one police cruiser. It was an entire fleet of unmarked federal vehicles and local law enforcement pulling up the long, sweeping driveway of the country club. The sirens wailed loudly, a terrifying sound that cut right through the frantic shouting inside the venue. The heavy mahogany double doors at the main entrance burst open. A dozen officers wearing tactical vests and federal windbreakers marched into the grand foyer, their expressions entirely serious. The country club security guards took one look at the federal badges and immediately stepped aside, offering absolutely no physical resistance. The lead agent walked straight to the top of the grand staircase, looking down over the chaotic ballroom. His eyes scanned the room completely, bypassing the terrified billionaires until they landed directly on the stage. Catherine froze, her hands still raised in the air as if she was preparing to strike Richard a second time. She stared at the federal agents pouring down the stairs, the reality of her situation finally crashing down on her. All her money, all her influence, and all her aristocratic power could not stop the flashing red and blue lights. She looked over at me one last time. There was no superiority left in her eyes. There was only pure, unadulterated terror. The untouchable empire had officially fallen. 3 weeks later, the Montgomery family name was no longer synonymous with high society charity. It was the headline of every major news network and financial paper in the country. The local news stations ran daily montages of the raid at the country club, looping the footage of federal agents escorting Catherine out the front doors in handcuffs while her ruined silk dress dragged across the wet pavement. The story of the aristocratic mother embezzling millions from sick children to buy a luxury townhouse for her son and his pregnant mistress was an absolute goldmine for the press. The public outrage was swift and merciless. At her first arraignment hearing, Catherine's high-priced defense team argued fiercely for her release. They cited her age, her community ties, and her supposedly frail health. But the federal prosecutor did not hold back. He presented the audio recording I had captured at the coffee shop, proving she was willing to commit extortion and destroy innocent lives to protect her fraud. He argued she was an extreme flight risk with access to untraceable offshore accounts. The judge agreed entirely. Catherine was denied bail and remanded to federal custody. The woman who used to constantly complain about the thread count of imported hotel linens was now sleeping on a thin mattress in a county holding cell, waiting for a trial that would undoubtedly end in a lengthy prison sentence. Richard fared no better in the aftermath. The spectacular public display of his infidelity and his direct connection to stolen charity funds completely destroyed his professional reputation. Within 48 hours of the gala, the hospital investors called an emergency meeting and formally severed all ties with his medical practice. But the financial ruin was only the beginning. The state medical board immediately launched a comprehensive investigation into his ethics and his licensing. They wanted to know if any of the embezzled money had been used to quietly fund his surgical equipment or pay off his medical malpractice insurance. His practice was effectively shut down, pending the final results of the review. To make matters worse for him, Vanessa was completely gone. The morning after the gala, she emptied the remaining balance of Richard's personal checking account, packed her designer bags, and fled the state. She abandoned the $3.2 million Gold Coast townhouse the second she realized federal agents were coming to seize the property as evidence. Richard was left entirely alone, isolated in the massive penthouse that was rapidly becoming a financial prison. His mother could no longer protect him. His mistress had robbed him and vanished. And I was finally ready to deliver the final legal blow. I sat in the sleek glass-walled conference room of my own divorce attorney office. Across the table sat Richard and Gregory Preston. Neither of them looked smug today. Gregory looked exhausted, constantly checking his phone as if bracing for another legal disaster. Richard looked like a hollow shell of a man. His designer suit hung loosely on his shrinking frame, and his eyes were red and deeply sunken. My attorney slid a thick stack of documents across the polished table. It was not a settlement offer. It was an absolute demand. As you know, my attorney said smoothly, the prenuptial agreement your mother drafted includes a very specific morality clause regarding infidelity. My client has provided undeniable medical and visual proof of your client adultery. Therefore, the clause is fully triggered in my client's favor. I leaned forward, clasping my hands together on the table. Under the terms of the agreement you forced me to sign 5 years ago, Richard, you forfeit your right to all marital assets. That includes the penthouse. But most importantly, it includes the medical clinic. The clinic I funded and built. Gregory cleared his throat, trying to muster a weak defense. The clinic is currently under federal investigation, he argued. The shares are practically worthless at the moment. They are worthless in his hands, I corrected sharply. But once I assume full ownership, fire him permanently, and rebrand the practice under a new management team, it will be highly profitable again. Sign the transfer documents, Richard. If you try to fight this in civil court, I will personally hand over the rest of the financial ledgers to the medical board and ensure you never hold a surgical scalpel again. Richard looked down at the legal documents, then up at me. He had absolutely no fight left in him. With a trembling hand, he picked up the gold-plated pen his lawyer handed him and signed his entire empire over to me without saying a single word. The moment the ink dried on those transfer documents, the heavy, suffocating weight that had been pressing down on my chest for 5 years finally lifted. I walked out of that glass-walled conference room not just as a free woman, but as the sole owner of a multi-million-dollar medical practice. I did not keep it, of course. I had absolutely no desire to manage a business built on Richard's deceit. Within a week, I liquidated the assets, sold the state-of-the-art surgical equipment, and transferred the commercial lease to a highly respected group of pediatricians. The massive capital I gained from that sale did not go into a shady shell company. It went directly into expanding my own independent auditing firm. Fast forward 6 months. I am currently standing in my brand new, heavily expanded corner office in the heart of downtown Chicago. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the city skyline. My firm has tripled in size and revenue. It turns out that when you publicly expose one of the largest philanthropic fraud schemes in the state, every honest corporate board in the city wants to hire you to audit their books. My professional schedule is completely booked for the next 2 years. A loud pop echoes through my sleek new office, snapping me out of my thoughts. I turn around to see Jamal standing near my modern glass conference table, holding a smoking bottle of vintage champagne. Nicole is standing right beside him, holding out 3 crystal flutes with a massive, genuine smile on her face. She looks completely radiant, entirely free from the toxic, suffocating shadow her mother had cast over her entire life. She and Jamal have become my true family. To the best auditor in Chicago, Jamal says, pouring the bubbling golden liquid into the glasses, and to the absolute worst day of Catherine Montgomery life. We all raise our glasses, the crystal clinking together with a clear, bright sound. I take a sip, letting the crisp sweetness wash over me. It is the taste of absolute, undeniable victory. We have a lot to celebrate today. This morning, the federal judge handed down Catherine's official sentence. She received 12 years in a federal penitentiary for embezzlement, wire fraud, and extortion. There will be no country club dinners or designer gowns in her foreseeable future, only a tiny concrete cell and a standard issue jumpsuit. As for Richard, the state medical board officially revoked his surgical license. Without his mother trust fund, his clinic, or his wealthy friends, he was forced to declare personal bankruptcy. The last I heard, he was living in a cramped studio apartment in a terrible neighborhood, working as a low-level medical biller for a suburban urgent care clinic. Vanessa never came back. She vanished with whatever cash she could carry, leaving Richard with absolutely nothing but the crushing reality of his own terrible choices. I walk over to the window looking down at the bustling city streets far below. When I first married into the Montgomery family, I genuinely believed I was the lucky one. I thought I had to bend over backwards, shrink my personality, and swallow their daily insults just to prove I was worthy of sitting at their mahogany dining table. They looked at my working-class background and saw a weakness they could easily exploit. They thought I was entirely disposable. But they fundamentally misunderstood what it means to build something from the ground up. When you earn every single dollar in your bank account through your own sweat and intellect, you do not easily surrender your worth to people who simply inherited theirs. Family is not defined by blood, and it is certainly not defined by money or elite social status. It is defined by the people who stand with you in the pouring rain when your entire world is falling apart. If you are listening to this right now and you are trapped in a toxic family dynamic, I need you to hear this loud and clear. Do not ever let narcissists convince you that you are small. Do not let people who hide behind fake smiles and inherited wealth dictate your value. They will try to rewrite reality to make you the villain. Let them try. Keep your records clean, keep your head high, and remember that the truth is the most destructive weapon you can ever wield against people who live in the dark. Thank you so much for following my journey. Have you ever had to stand up to a toxic family member or a manipulative mother-in-law who tried to tear you down? How did you break free and find your own justice? I would absolutely love to hear your stories of survival and sweet revenge in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content. Share this video with anyone who might be struggling and needs a reminder of their own strength. Your best life begins the exact moment you decide to fight back. When analyzing the intricate dynamics of Claire's journey, the most profound lesson that emerges from this story is the unparalleled power of emotional control combined with financial independence. When faced with a sudden devastating betrayal from her husband and mother-in-law, Claire's immediate instinct could easily have been panic screaming or despair. Instead, she leaned heavily into her professional competence. She allowed her abusers to believe they had completely won brilliantly, using their own arrogance as a shield, while she meticulously gathered undeniable evidence of their crimes. This narrative highlights a universal reality about toxic relationships. Manipulative individuals often rely on shock tactics and emotional devastation to keep their targets entirely off balance. They manufacture chaos so you cannot see the truth hidden beneath their lies. Catherine and Richard assumed Claire would simply crumble because they equated power with inherited wealth, social status, and aggressive legal threats. They completely underestimated the quiet, unstoppable strength of someone who built her own career from the ground up and maintained her own concrete skills. Claire's ultimate triumph was not merely about exposing a multi-million-dollar fraud or a hidden pregnancy. It was about fundamentally refusing to internalize the false narrative that she was disposable or worthless. By maintaining her icy composure and trusting her own abilities, she systematically dismantled an entire empire of deceit. Her journey serves as a powerful reminder that your true value is never determined by how toxic people attempt to diminish you, but rather by how you choose to stand your ground when your reality is severely tested. Take a moment to evaluate the relationships in your own life And if you have ever had to break free from a manipulative environment, please share your story in the comments below.